Grace wondered if she would ever get used to the wind in Yorkshire as she leaned into it, feeling it loosen the hair pinned beneath 2 cauls on either side of her head. It had begun long before they approached the city of York on their journey from Westminster in June, and it seemed to her that it had blown steadily from then until now. Granted, she was standing unsheltered on the southern rampart of Sheriff Hutton Castle, one of King Richard's strongholds, perched high on a hill. On a clear day, like today, she could just see the towers of the mighty York Minster a dozen miles over the tree-tops of the Forest of Gulch. She often came up here to contemplate her change of fortune, and to thank God for her blessings. A little more than a year ago, she had been an 11-year-old orphan, living on the good sister's charity at the Abbey of Delaprey outside Northampton. She was astonished when she was told she was to have a new home. A young man, dressed more richly than she could ever have imagined, stood waiting as she bade farewell to the nuns, many of them weeping, and then took her up in front of him on his horse. Escorted by a body of 4 horsemen, Grace and her knight cantered out of the convent gate and onto the road for Grafton. "It seems you are not any orphan bastard, Grace," the abbess had told her sternly that fateful day. "Your father was King Edward, may God rest his soul, adulterer though he was. God has smiled on you, my child, for his saintly widow has sent for you, and will do her duty by you." Mother Howes turned away. "'Tis more than can be said for the father," she muttered. She chose not to enlighten Grace that her royal father had more than adequately compensated for the child's keep through the years. She was peeved the Abbey would now lose the pension. Grace hardly had time to ponder the astounding news as she quickly packed her few belongings in a cloth bundle and hurried out to the waiting escort. She turned and waved once more at the blue-garbed group in the Abbey courtyard, and then never looked back. Grace had been tongue-tied for weeks after arriving at Grafton, the country estate of the once Dowager Queen Elizabeth, wife to Grace's dead father. At first, Grace had not dared ask why her mentor was now addressed as Dame Grey, but she bided her time, knowing full well her curiosity would get the better of her one day. Staring about her at the rich hangings, silver plates, and enormous beds, Grace had been overwhelmed in those first anxious days. Delaprey Abbey had not been a well-endowed community, and thus she had never known such opulence as this existed. She was given a new gown and shoes in place of her faded blue habit and clogs, and she now slept in a soft tester bed, made up with sheets as white as snow, shared with one of her new half-sisters, instead of squeezing herself between 2 other novices on a pallet of straw in a dormitory that slept 16. She kept pinching herself to make sure it was not all a dream, and it was weeks before she would open her mouth except in prayer or to answer Elizabeth's questions. Her sisters ignored her at first, uncertain how to treat this newcomer suddenly brought into their midst, but the respect and fear that they had for their lady mother meant that they came to accept her, especially as she did not put on airs, or, indeed, say much of anything. When she was informed that she would now be known as Lady Grace Plantagenet, she had shaken in her shoes. But in due time Grace learned how to curtsy and address each member of the household correctly and recognize her new title. At first, the only people she felt comfortable with, because they did not speak to her directly, were the servants, although Grace observed them whispering behind their hands, and, as insecure children do, thought they were gossiping about her and making fun of her bastardy. Although by then she had learned the astonishing fact that all her half-siblings were also bastards. One day, while working in the herb garden, Grace had plucked up her courage and asked an attendant how that could be. The woman had looked about her quickly before confiding in the girl the story of Edward's first betrothal contract with another, I remember my mistress's terrible anger when a messenger came to tell her, one cold January day in sanctuary, that Parliament had declared her marriage with the king illegal, and that from now on she would no longer be addressed as Queen Dowager, but plain Dame Grey, her name from her first marriage, you understand, she told Grace. She broke down and wept when the man left, screaming at the children, "Certes, now you are all bastards, and may Edward rot in hell." The worst news of all for my poor mistress was that her 2 sons were still held in the Tower by that usurper Richard. We watched her fall down on her knees, begging God to restore them to her. It was pitiful to see. She suffered mightily, my lady. Grace had been taken aback by this tale, and though she was unsure what usurper meant, it comforted her that she was not the only one with the shame of bastardy weighing on her, and she had more and more sympathy for the woman who had shown her such charity by taking her in. Still, Grace's shyness often left her tongue-tied, and made her wish a large hole would open in the ground and swallow her. One day Elizabeth snapped at her. "Child, come out from behind that arras. No one will bite you. You must learn to be proud of your royal name, not pretend you are part of the wall." Grace was doubly mortified, and shrank behind an expressionless mask and further into her shell. She cried herself to sleep that night, awed by her new surroundings and bewildered by her new position.